this is just the beginning.
Welcome to the Pandemic Pivot 1 year later virtual event. I'm Hans Nichols, a political reporter at Axios. Thank you to Facebook for making this conversation possible on small business and digital tools. And welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter at Axios and hashtag Axios event. So over the next 30 minutes, I and myself and Aja Whitaker-Moore will be unpacking just how businesses have adapted to an unprecedented year of economic turmoil. Our first guest is a senator from Washington State and chair of the Senate Help Committee, Senator Patty Murray, joining us from Washington, D.C. Senator, thanks for being with us.
Well, it is great to be with you this afternoon.
So, Senator Murray, you've been talking about paid family leave long before it was part of the national conversation. But walk us through how it actually worked for small businesses. Is there a threshold? Does it apply to everyone? How would it work for, say, a business of 20 that has someone that needs to go on medical leave or a family member that needs to go on medical?
That's such an important question because so many small businesses are obviously worried. They have few employees, and if they lose somebody, then it impacts their business. But the opposite is also true. If somebody comes to work sick, as we now know in this pandemic, and makes everybody else sick, then they lose out too. So we are making sure that people have access to paid family leave, a federal benefit, so they don't. The small employer is not in charge of it. The federal government will support that person while they're on paid leave. So it shouldn't have an impact on their personal bottom line. Obviously, having anybody out sick has an impact on our small businesses. But as I said, if you have one person that comes into work sick and impacts everybody else, then you lose out even more.
Well, you're talking to small businesses all the time. You're back in your state a lot. What are they telling you? What are their concerns about it? Just the fact that they're going to have an employee out? Is it the paperwork? What are you hearing?
I am not hearing those kinds of issues from people. Most small businesses want to make sure, today, especially after we have lived through a pandemic, of how to make sure that they can keep their employees, how they can make sure that if someone is sick, they don't come to work without having a huge impact to their bottom line. And that's what family paid leave does for small businesses.
Now, let me ask a version of that, and I think this is going to be probably something that businesses have talked about in the past, but how it works for childcare. Because we're having this big national debate about when should the federal government, when should state governments, when should any government come in and help defray some of the costs of childcare. What does your plan do, and how has the conversation changed since the pandemic?
It has changed night and day. Before the pandemic, childcare was a stressful conversation for every family inside their home. But they rarely talked about it, especially to their employer, because they were worried that they wouldn't be given a promotion or wouldn't keep their job if they said childcare is a huge issue for me. So it was just like silent epidemic of what do I do with my kids? How am I going to keep working? My childcare situation has changed. What do we do? Now with this legislation that we are pushing forward, supported by the Biden administration, it means that if you are that you will not pay more than 7% of your salary for childcare. I have talked to so many people whose childcare costs are more than their mortgage, or they just say, I'm not going to take a promotion. I can't work more hours. I can't afford my childcare, or they simply can't afford it. Or to your question, the pandemic, because it had such an impact on childcare businesses themselves, people don't have access to childcare. So we need to make sure that we can rebuild that industry, that we can make sure that they can deal with their new costs that they have because of the pandemic, and that people can afford it. That's what our legislation does.
Now, I'm glad you brought up sort of the Biden legislative proposal. It was in Build Back Better, it was in the American Families Plan. Parts of it were diffused elsewhere. But there's a big debate on Capitol Hill right now on what's going to get passed, how it's going to get passed. And without getting too much into the weeds, which I think as reporters sometimes we're too focused on the process instead of the policy, how likely is it that, and what are you going to do to ensure that the paid family leave aspects of what Biden has proposed is actually going to become legislation?
We are working with everybody. In my committee, the Help Committee, we are working on the policy. We're working on the pay for side with other committees. I am talking to the Biden administration constantly, as well as our leaders on both sides, House and Senate, to make sure this is in the final package that moves forward. It's so important. I can't tell you how many people have said to me in the last year plus that childcare is the one issue that is keeping their family from being stable.
So I'm glad you said final package. I think I heard singular package, not packages. So does that mean you're going to be pushing for this to go into one big reconciliation bill, or do you think there'll ultimately be multiple packages?
Well, there is a possibility of two. One would be the infrastructure side, the so-called cement side, roads, bridges, highways, broadband, that package there is a bipartisan group working on that. That could go by itself, but it will go as well with a package under reconciliation. I won't go into the weeds on how we pass that will take 50 votes.
But the weeds are important here. I'll contradict myself ever so slightly. So will you support the cement bill if there isn't or what's required for you to support the cement bill? Is it a firm sort of acknowledgement from Senator Manchin, from Senator Sinema, that they'll be willing to do a reconciliation bill? What do they need to do? What does the gang of 20 need to do to get your vote on the cement bill?
Well, let me just say that the majority leader, Senator Chuck Schumer, has made it very clear to our caucus that both packages will go. And that is a direct message to all of us that we need to work to either get the bipartisan package move forward. Now, that could fall apart. We do not know. But if it falls apart, then it will go into one package. But they will both move if there ends up being two packages.
So that to me sounds like you're telling your fellow progressives, and I think it's fair to call you a progressive, that everyone should be on board the cement bill, because Schumer's given his assurances that there are going to be two bills.
I will be the first person, not the last person, to tell you that details matter. We are working on all of this right now. We will all reserve our right to make a decision when we actually have the packages in front of us. I do not know what's going to be in either one of them yet.
Okay, so just I one final one on this one. You haven't firmly given your position that you'll be for the $1.2 trillion, the cement bill. You're still mulling that.
Oh, you know what? I haven't even seen the details of it. I don't know what's in it. I don't know if it's good for my state yet. I don't know what's excluded from it, and I don't know how it's paid for. None of that is public, nor, I think, decided by the bipartisan group. And details matter on these important bills.
Well, I'm glad you brought up your state, because Washington State, of course, saw some of the first cases of coronavirus, the first known cases. I should caveat that. And yet they're pretty aggressive in both shutdowns and getting money to small businesses, to theaters, to restaurants. Walk us through what Washington State did well and what perhaps could have been done a little bit differently, especially for the city center businesses in Seattle, the theaters, the restaurants.
Yeah, it's such an important question. I think all of us want to know what went wrong so we can fix it, because we will go through something like this again, and we want to make sure we get it right. I think it was very difficult as we first put packages together to make sure that the support got out to the businesses that were especially hurt by this. You mentioned restaurants, theaters, obviously anywhere where people gather, were really hurt by this. So some of the first rounds of support didn't get to the people that needed them. And we continue to see these businesses, even as we reopen, are struggling to get customers back in, to meet their bottom lines, to get their employees to come back to work because they don't feel safe. So they are still struggling, and we still need to meet that need of making sure that our small businesses get the support they need to get through this pandemic and to a better end.
You mentioned safety, and Seattle's been in the news a lot over safety, over crime. How much of this has to do, and there's a big national conversation President Biden's going to be talking about today, how much of Seattle coming back has to do with families feeling safe going downtown?
I think for all of us, as we have lived through this pandemic, safety has become an issue that we are all very conscious of from a number of perspectives. And that it's a bottom line for people. Do they feel comfortable and safe going out? during a pandemic? Are other people vaccinated? How do they protect themselves? What are the rules of the road when they go to work or go to a business? As well as a lot of, some of the scenes we have seen here in the Capitol where we had a physical attack. So obviously everybody takes a breath and says, am I going to be safe? And I think Seattle and Washington State are working really hard to show that they are going to open up back up. A lot of the streets were abandoned because buildings were closed, and that always is difficult. So what it says to me is we have a lot of work left to do to help our small businesses open, to make sure people feel comfortable and safe as they go back to work, go back to restaurants, go back to theaters.
But just briefly, is crime a problem in downtown Seattle?
I think crime is a problem in a lot of communities and cities today. It's part of what everybody is trying to deal with. This is something that a lot of our local mayors are dealing with, and I'm sure Seattle is as well. Remember, I cover the entire state. I have a lot of cities, small cities, big cities, that are all facing the same kinds of challenges, from homelessness to businesses that have shuttered, to people on the street, and trying to get all of that back in control is the challenge of our time.
Well, Senator Murray, thank you very much for your time, and we'll be watching to see how the details fall out on all these packages. Thanks, Senator.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And next, we'll have the View from the Top segment from my colleague, Vice President of Growth at Axios, Mia Vallow.
I'm Mia Vallow from Axios, and I'd like to introduce Rich Rao, Vice President of Small Business Group for Facebook. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Mia. Great to be here with you.
Rich, from your viewpoint, what is the state of small business right now?
Well, small businesses face a really difficult road to recovery, but in many parts of the United States, we are seeing some bright spots and reason for renewed optimism. We recently ran a global state of small business report, and we surveyed 35,000 small businesses around the world, including 18,000 here in the United States. And when we look at the trends, we can see small businesses have really been on a roller coaster. We've seen closures and then decreased sales, and now they're trying to rehire and there's staff shortages. And that makes it really difficult for small businesses to plan. And I'll share a couple of stats with you that I think really tell the story. We found that 22% of small businesses in the US reported that they were closed earlier this year, and that was up from when we last did the survey in October. We've also seen more than half of small businesses reporting a decline in sales compared to the same time last year. And the news gets a little worse. Women-owned businesses continue to face a more difficult challenge going forward. They've experienced just a greater drop in sales than their male counterparts. But there is good news, Mia. The good news is that small business owners are resilient and they are forward-looking. We found from our survey that most small businesses, nearly 70% of the US, reported confidence in their own ability to stay open over the next 6 months. And that's despite everything that's happened. So that is some much needed and some really good news for our main streets everywhere.
That's great to hear. And how have you seen small businesses pivot during the pandemic? And what changes that may have been initially temporary fixes will become permanent?
That has been just one of the most remarkable things that's happened during the pandemic. And, throughout what I've seen in my career and working with small businesses, we've seen this pivot from offline to online. That's the macro trend. And, what's happened is small businesses are now really becoming omni-channel. They are serving customers in their store, now with curbside, now online, virtual experiences sometimes, and even with messaging. With our products, we see that with Messenger and WhatsApp. And what's ended up being created is there's now a whole lot of channels where you see small businesses interact with their customers and engage them and grow their own business that way. In Michigan, there's a business I love. It's called Lush Yummies. You got to check it out. If you haven't seen them, go check it out. But they sell these wonderful pies, amazing pies. And their founder, Jennifer Lyle, she created the business actually right when the pandemic started, but figured out a way to keep making the pies and was selling them online and then facilitating curbside pickup. And she would create these drops to keep fresh inventory in the hands of customers, and she would then notify her customers when the drops were occurring. And she ran what we saw directly is we saw personalized ads that she ran, to her community to build awareness. And then she used Instagram and Facebook for free, which so many small businesses do, to then post about the drops and then share the timing of everything. So that's one example, but there's, literally like hundreds of thousands of businesses like Lush Yummies, and they're finding ways to pivot online, and they're discovering new revenue streams, because of that. So, on your question, as we shift towards a post-pandemic world in the US, I think we're going to continue to see businesses explore how they can grow their online presence. That's not going away, even as they return to a world of in-person, customer interactions.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to have to get some pie after our conversation today. And what advice are you giving to small businesses to grow their business and really make sure that they are set up for success on this road to recovery?
Yeah, I am optimistic. I have to be cautiously optimistic about the future, though, and because small businesses, they've still got a long road ahead with a lot of challenges, and we all have to understand that. Earlier I mentioned there's tremendous optimism and that resilience, and so my advice is, keep it up. You've got the attitude and the customers and the innovation, so expect better days ahead. But these are difficult times, and small businesses can all use your help right now. And I hear from so many of these small businesses who have pivoted, like the story I told you. But one customer who has really helped shape her own brand, has given some really good advice for small businesses. It comes from a company called Sonara. It's a skincare brand, and it's founded by Rebecca Jensen, and she had this great advice that really stuck with me, which is, she said, people buy from people. And, gone are these days when as a founder of a brand, you can sort of say hidden behind the brand, and especially if you're a small business. And, she had a personal story and she was nervous about sharing it, as, many people would be. But the reception she received from her customers was so encouraging. And she's advising, all small businesses to tell your story. Now, we created some features and announced some new features in a product called Facebook Business Suite. And that allows a small business to help them schedule their own personal story, and they can edit their posts. And we know small businesses are so busy, and if we can save them some time and still allow them to share their good idea, that's the ideal situation that we want to help small businesses with. But bottom line, my advice is be willing to try something new and find new ways to acquire your customers. Your customers will respond to you.
Great. And finally, what is the last thing you bought from a small business? And do you have any final advice on how our audience can support small businesses going forward?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, Mia. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to a ranch vacation with my family in Montana. And so I needed a cowboy hat. So I bought this Stenson cowboy hat from a small business called El Potrero, and they're in North Carolina. And this is how business is working today. The hat was made in the United States, in Texas. It was sold from a small business in North Carolina. I found it, online, and then it's going to be shipped to California, where I'm then going to take it for my trip in Montana. And that's the nature of what's possible today, and happening in so many spots. So, anyways, I'm excited about my trip, and also for the small business and the product I'll be receiving. And so, on that note, I know before we wrap, I know people are always asking, how do I help support small businesses? And the best way is obviously to shop with them, which we're all doing. But small businesses also tell me all the time that, one of the best ways to help them is to engage with them on social media, follow them on Instagram, like their posts. If you have a great meal, leave a review on Facebook. All of these simple gestures just really add up to helping them grow their business, and you get a great product and a service in return. So, that's my advice, and I wish all the small businesses listening, well, and as we get through this recovery phase together.
That's great advice, Rich. Thank you so much for joining us today and for your time.
Thanks again, Mia. Appreciate it.
Now back to my colleague, Aja Whitaker-Moore.
Hi, I'm Aja Whitaker-Moore, Managing Editor of Business at Axios. Our final guest is Olga Sagan, the owner of Piroshky Piroshky Bakery in Seattle and the creator of Catch-22 Market, joining us from Seattle, Washington. Hi, Olga. Welcome to Axios.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for joining us today. So we're going to talk a little bit about small business and how small businesses have pivoted following the pandemic. The pandemic really ravaged a lot of small businesses, but there's also been examples of success and stories about evolution and coming out stronger. It seems like Piroshky Piroshky is one of those businesses that's in the latter. So can you tell us a little bit about your company and what happened to it when the pandemic first hit?
Absolutely. So Piroshky Piroshky been a bakery in Pike Place Market since 1992. So we pride ourselves in Russian pastries and putting a Northwest flair on Russian street food. So we have been pretty successful here in the region. We, at 2019, had 5 retail locations and a food truck. So presented pretty well for tourists and for locals alike. And then, in 2020, everything just crashed and burned within a week. And Seattle was one of the first cities to be hit with this pandemic. And definitely businesses in downtown were the first one to really feel it. So we felt it very strongly, and we realized that we have to change our ways. And changing our ways was going digital and connecting with our customers online.
So tell me a little bit about how your operations actually changed to adapt to a very different reality. How did you use digital tools to innovate?
Absolutely. Well, I think significant, to say the least. So my biggest frustration as a small business owner was that I don't know any of my digital customers. We, like a lot of other small business owners, were used to using third-party platforms. And I've been always preaching that third-party platform should be your marketing expense, not your income. Just how much it costs to actually do it. And you don't get to have your customers. They're not your customers. They're customers of third-party platforms. So my biggest goal was to bring people to my website, because we did have a website, a functioning website. We were able to do in-store pickup orders and, a couple other things. But people would not visit my website. So at that point, I realized we have to do something bigger, and it takes a village. So we have created a Catch-22 Market hub where independent restaurants are in one hub, and businesses can connect with them directly via their own website. And as we were transitioning through last year and creating more and more features for us to connect with the customers on their own terms, we have added that capability for other businesses on Catch-22 Market platform. So before, if we were just brick and mortar stores, we did not know who our customers are. Now we are a home delivery. We do pop-up events, which is significant. We go as far north as Fairbanks and Anchorage, and we just did Washington, D.C. last week. And really bringing our product to the customer and connecting with them digitally, and also able to create that connection and go back to them and talk to them about their experiences.
And how many other businesses are now on your Catch-22 platform? Are they also all focused in retail or food, or what kind of mix are we talking about?
So we have about 250 restaurants on the Catch-22 platform. So the 250 restaurants are present there, and most of them are there with their own website. So consumer can go into Catch-22 Market, find the food they are looking for, or feeling like, and then connect with that business directly. We also have now, the next step of this project is user-generated e-commerce stores. So we have about 3 live stores already on Catch-22 Market. The difference is it is user-generated content, which means the restaurant owns their space on the platform. It has a direct connection to what customer sees. It has a direct connection to what they want to offer. Do they want to offer home delivery? Do they want to offer events? Do they want to ship? Or do they just want a simple in-store pickups? So now those restaurants are able to present their offerings in a manner that consumer has the same experience without having to visit different website, which is consumer so used to that with third-party platforms. They do like to have the same experience.
Well, it sounds like your businesses definitely went through a major technological transformation over the past year. What was, the one of the most surprising parts of going from a mostly physical retailer to now an online focused business and service provider for other people?
I think there was a lot of surprises. There was a lot of shock and a lot of mistakes. so, so it was definitely a huge transformation. And before, when people think about us and our business and our bakery, they think about the smell. And it is impossible to take the smell online. So I realized when we start pushing into digital world, this is a completely different beast. You have to apply completely different skill sets and completely different interactions with customers, from how do you deliver your message, how do you talk to your customers. You have to learn marketing, you have to learn digital media, the ads, and there's so much to learn. I felt like I was starting a whole new business from scratch. And the good help was that I do have my loyal fans and our local customers who were willing to support us and forgive all the mistakes, forgive many, many mistakes we have made while trying to deliver their food to their house, or while, missing a event time, or many other ones that we were experiencing during their learning curve. And the best thing about it, this learning curve, what I'm happy with my learning curve and my mistakes, now I can teach other businesses and have them avoid that, hopefully, and really talk through my experience of what it takes to go online and what kind of point of view, how do you need to change your point of view, how do you possibly need to change your offerings and your menu, and what is important to small businesses.
So I think a lot of small businesses went through that evaluation period over the past year and also looked, within to their own workforce, their culture. How did you have to adapt your own policies or culture to support your workforce during the pandemic? And what are some of those shifts that you think are going to be permanent for your company going forward?
Well, I think so. For me, I think a realization that online is not going anywhere. It is here to stay. Home delivery is here to stay, which is a huge, huge part of it. So as a small business owner, for me, it's so important to realize that I need to control that process. I need to, if businesses order food from us, they want to connect with us. A lot of, and businesses want to connect with us, consumer want to connect with us. What I have learned, a lot of people do not enjoy third-party platforms, and they rather support all the businesses directly and support local employees that have benefits and other perks. So for us, the biggest shift was to teach our employees to be open-minded, to understand that this digital transformation is not going anywhere, and we have to accept it. We have to accept it and learn the tools and the skills that needed to perform well and to meet our customers where they are. So I'm glad people are coming back out. I'm glad people are going to what you call a back to normal, but we should not oversee this big learning process that we have experienced this COVID, and realize that there is a lot of opportunity for small businesses to revision their teams, revise how they do business, and really meet their customer wherever the customer wants to be.
So a lot of companies right now have been focusing on worker shortages and supply chain issues, kind of hampering their ability to kind of reopen fully. How are you viewing those challenges in your world, and what kind of advice do you give to other small businesses who are having trouble finding workers and finding the supplies that they need on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. Well, for us, again, I've been one of the blessed enough entrepreneurs who actually kept most of my staff. And because we were able to pivot and we were learning, so maybe we weren't able to pivot right away, but we decided to invest the money into learning about it. So a lot of my employees I were able to retain, and now I am so grateful for that, because there is a shortage. It is very hard to find people. So I think what you have to go back is you have to go back to what your culture is, what your brand is, and to really understand, are you able to survive in this environment? Because being a small business, being a restaurant owner or a food service owner, it's a very hard industry to be in. It's a very small margin industry. It's a very unpredictable industry. So if you are set up for that challenge, you have to embrace what is so unique about you and not afraid to tell customers, hey, we're paying high wages. We're using locally sourced product. This is our story. This is what we stand for. Hence, we have to charge you more money. So it is a really encompassing, idea of how do I want to run my business, and be transparent with your consumer about it. And I feel that consumers who love you for your product, they will understand and support. So keep talking about your story, keep saying what your value is, and keep really be transparency. I think is the biggest thing that consumers want to see.
That's really helpful. I think as we're wrapping up here, the end of our conversation, maybe you could give us a piece of advice to small business owners who, were not as lucky over the past year and were forced to close, and now thinking about, how to revamp and prepare for the future. What are some of the key aspects to reopening that you would say a small business owner needs to consider right now?
Oh, it's so challenging. You're asking such a challenging questions. I think this is look at it as a way to start new. If you're completely been shattered and you're starting from scratch, start from scratch correctly. Our biggest value that we realize, we always create alumni networks, which mean when employees transition out, we always keep our relationship with them. And we say, hey, is it okay that we're going to call you up if something happens and you can come back? I probably have about 20 to 30 alumni employees that come in here and there just because we kept that personal relationship going. I think if you had to shut down and restart, this is a really good time to assess everything that you have been doing and see, how do I want to go forward and protect myself going forward with that.
Well, thank you, Olga. We really appreciate your conversation today, and thank you for speaking with Axios.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. Thank you to our sponsor, Facebook, for making this event possible. And for more information or to sign up for newsletters, visit axios.com/newsletters or visit us on the Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.